news from anybody else before we get started? That's exciting, Ivy.
Oh yes, in Bhutan we are actually quite comfortable with the COVID. We only have had 918 918 cases so far, and I think there are only less than 30 active cases now. So we get to actually go around the country, freely. So I went to two places. One is towards the west, one is towards the east, and during the last 2 weeks, we were very busy visiting those places. We had a project from. I also happen to be the country coordinator for the Bhutan Water Partnership. It's just a country office of the Global Water Partnership. So we had two small projects in these two districts. So I went to one which is in a place called Tiram, and we also have we have a captive breeding center for white-bellied heron. We went to visit that place. We were there for a week, and then 2 days ago I was in a place called Paro, which is towards the west of Bhutan, and there we had a project there. So we also went to visit that place. So it was a busy week anyway.
Yeah, busy, busy. Well, that
Uh,
sounds like some good positive news too. While we're still trying to stay safe in many countries. So I'm glad some other places it's looking positive for the coronavirus kind of outcome. All right, so glad folks are doing okay, staying safe, staying healthy. Um, Sounds like some productive spring break, or hopefully just a break in general, where you didn't have to be here on a Tuesday morning or evening, wherever you are in the world. So before we get into a discussion about leadership development, I sent an email maybe about like 20 minutes ago, finally getting caught up. The fun thing, if you want to call it fun, um, in trying to make what I wanted to do accessible for everybody is dealing with copyright laws and asking for permission. And I finally, with a couple of things, just said, you know what, I am just going to do something. And if somebody doesn't like it, then I'll just apologize later for like scanning something out of a book. So that's what I was waiting for. And I was like, I can't wait for you all to respond to me any longer. So I broke a copyright law, so they can come and arrest me if they want for copying stuff out of a book. So I emailed you all Moodle, and I think Paula has emailed every student too about Moodle and updates taking longer. So hopefully this week you'll at least be able to get what you need out of Moodle if you haven't had a chance to or haven't found what you needed. So I wanted to go into Moodle because your second lab is available, but it's also attached to that email in case it wasn't, you can't see it for whatever reason in Moodle. You should be able to see it. But I'm going to pull it up and share my screen here and walk through it with everybody so you know what to expect when you open it. I personally, I think it's a fun assignment. I know that might sound a little weird coming from your instructor to say, I think this is a fun assignment. But hopefully after you see it, you will agree. So I'm going to share my screen here. And da, 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 da. All right. So also so I can see your all's faces too. All right. So this is your second lab that's been finally posted and the one in which I broke copyright laws. So it's not due for about 6 weeks. So there's quite a lot of time there to work on this. I would say from a perspective, it's not overly complicated. There's two major parts, and I'm going to walk you through each of the parts. So, and I think I mentioned this a while back, but so part of this is taking a bunch of different inventories and quizzes, if you will, about your leadership style. and in a lot of different ways, and then the interpretation of that. And what I wanted to acknowledge, first and foremost, and kind of the hardest part in picking and choosing which ones to go through, is acknowledging that these are pretty much developed from an American perspective or a Western perspective, and know that this may impact results for you all and is taken from an American perspective. There are not many assessments that you're able to find that are created by or made for more of an international audience in a lot of ways. So I at least want to acknowledge that, and in part apologize that these are the only ones that are really um, available out there that have been tested quite frequently or used quite frequently are from an American perspective. So just want to share that. So just in general, you're going to take 11 different inventories. When I say 11, don't panic. They're relatively short, like kind of quizzes. Okay, so I'll show you each one, but 11 different inventories, and then provide a perspective of the results. So, and I've got in here, I tried to make this as easy as possible and say, these are your 6 headers, or 11, sorry, 12 headers. My coffee still hasn't kicked in. 12 different headers for the actual document that you'll turn in. So literally cut and paste them into Word or Pages or Google Doc, whichever kind of program you're using to do your assignments. So those are all your headers, and if you will, at least put your name on them. I know where they come from, and pretty simple, but just making sure, put that at the top of page 1. So you'll take all of these inventories, and I'm going to flip through them right quick as well and kind of explain each one. And then for each, you will go through a few questions or just write your assessment of the score. So, were you surprised by anything? Or if you agree with the score or not. Sometimes you get, say, a score that said you're, well, at least for Jung's, and it's very similar to Myers-Briggs, is like an INTF. Well, maybe you don't agree with part of that you're, say, an introvert versus an extrovert. So tell us why, like why you agree or disagree with some of that score. What was the result? And do you find, is there something that is the key takeaway that you might be able to use in your leadership, or does it give you a different perspective of serving as a leader? Is there anything that you can take from that and actually apply if with a better understanding of your leadership style? And so for each one, you'll tell us about your score and what that means to you for each one. And then you'll also provide just a general conclusion, kind of a perspective that wraps everything up from taking those 11, any learning moments, any opportunities to use what you've gained or learned in your current setting, if you want to explain what that is and how you could apply it, or even why. So for each one of these, you're going to take something that looks a little bit like this. And for each one, it provides you a score. So essentially, you'll say, is this very true, not true? For all of these, you'll score it. Each one provides instructions for scoring, and it'll tell you, like for this one example, for example, do you have more of a technical skill versus a human skill versus a conceptual skill? This is one of my favorites, intolerance for ambiguity. Usually find that those that are more culturally competent have a higher tolerance for ambiguity. So we'll see if that's the case for our group in our international university setting. Conflict styles, like how you handle conflict, if something describes you well or it doesn't describe you well, and what that means. So you'll go through all the items to score them. And again, all of these are only, or some of, I haven't looked to see if there are other languages for some of these. You might be able to find probably mostly either Spanish. Yeah, pretty much would be the only ones that I know of that might come in a different language. So these are all going to be taken in English, unfortunately. So at least given all the time that you have to work on this. But again, if you have any issues with one of these or don't understand a particular thing, please let me know, and I'm more than happy to explain. LMX, or Leader Member Exchange, is your next one, your inventory of that. And I left this description from the book that I stole it from. But at least you have a source and a reference if you'd like to explore further after class, if you'd like. So Leader Member Exchange, pretty quick one there, only 8 questions, and left the description so you can interpret more of what that means. Jung's typology is very similar, or if not the same. Myers-Briggs is what it is looking to tell you is a typology for Myers-Briggs. But it's a quicker version. If you've ever taken the full Myers-Briggs inventory, it is extremely long. And this one is, I mean, it's not short, but it's shorter. You've got 32 questions there, which is actually much shorter than the full-on Myers-Briggs to give you a score. So you'll go through that process of scoring, and then it'll tell you which is your type. And if you want to, you certainly don't have to, because this gives you a pretty summative explanation for each type. But if you want to go and Google like the full explanation of each of these, or the one that you are scored as, please do. Probably a handful of you have already gotten your Myers-Briggs type before. And so it'll be interesting, I think, for some of you who do have that, to compare, like, because actually your Myers-Briggs typology, or in this case, Jung's typology, actually can adapt and change over time. So for those of you that know what yours is before you take this, you might see a change, and it might be an interesting perspective to take. Mine is fluctuated between ENTJ and INTJ, but it's always been the TJ, or yeah, NTJ. So essentially what that tells me is that I'm a forced extrovert. I'm actually more of an introvert, and when I have to be an extrovert, there you go. Sorry for the skewness, but on emotional intelligence, you've got 16 questions there. We've talked about emotional intelligence before. There's also plenty of things out there about emotional intelligence. That one we didn't go too far into an additional reading on, but there's that one, and it provides, again, for each one, how that score is interpreted. Power of followership, again, one of my favorite topics that we'll actually spend 2 weeks on later this semester. You'll do a power of followership, essentially asking or kind of measuring your take on followership style, how you engage with followers. Then one on transformational leadership. I do not include one on transactional leadership. That's usually what is juxtaposed with transformational leadership, is transactional leadership. But focus more on transformational leadership. I think that's much more of an applied leadership theory, if you will. And so have included transformational. And leadership orientation. Are you more human resource driven, or are you more political driven or symbolic driven? It'll tell you what each of really those is, but some pretty simple, just 6 questions to rate for yourself, and we'll go through the scoring on that one as well. Cultural preference, which I think this is going to be very interesting for this group, given the international variety we have in our class. So looking at the different perspectives, are you more looking or more drawn to a consistency culture, an adaptive culture, an achievement culture? And before you ask, what on earth are those 4 things? There is a list of values for each of the 4 types and what is more valued for each one. And so this one, I think, may give you opportunity to actually disagree with results. So I'm gonna, I'll be very interested to see what comes of the cultural preference. And last but not least, are you a change leader? So how do you handle having to make change? Now, what I will say is a lot of these will mention workplace. So when you're taking these inventories, I encourage you to think from the your most important perspective, and maybe that is your actual workplace where you are employed and work. For others of you, that may be from your volunteer perspective. Like if you're serving in a significant volunteer role, maybe you take these inventories from that perspective of being a leader as a volunteer. So I leave that up to you, but I would think about your context consistently as you take these, even though it mentions workplace. I would take it from the perspective that is either most meaningful for you or the most appropriate for you. So hopefully that makes sense. And that's the last one. So there are 11. Each again gives a scoring or interpretation what your score actually means. And then once you have a score for each one, you are, sorry to make you dizzy, I'm going to scroll back up. Think through these questions. What was your initial reaction? Excuse me. Were you surprised? Do you agree with it? Why or why not? Your key takeaway, and if you have any other observations as you go through each one in particular or all of them, what are your kind of observations about yourself that may not be reflected in these questions? Is there something that stands out to you? So Fabian, do you have a question?
What demain? What demain?
Fabian, do you have a question? Or does anybody have a question about this, your lab assignment?
Sorry, it was a mistake.
Hopefully folks find it interesting to take these things about yourself. At least I do, in terms of each one, and understanding my leadership as well. Questions?
Yeah, Erica, I don't necessarily have a question about the assignment, but I just wanted to let you know that on my end, it may be different for somebody else, but I can only see past or where's Moodle? I can only see up to week 11 in Moodle. So
Okay.
this doesn't show up. And on week 11, it says April 26th through March 2nd. So I'm assuming that meant May 2nd.
It did. Yep.
Okay.
Thank
yeah,
you.
I can only see up to week 11.
Okay. Yeah, that one. Thank you. And you can't see, if you go to week 14, you can't see the lab?
No, I can only
Okay.
see up to week 11.
Okay, thank you.
Erica,
Carlene?
I just popped this in the chat, but how long do you want the analysis for each evaluation? Are you thinking a few sentences or a few paragraphs?
So I'm thinking at least one paragraph for each assessment. So when I thought about like giving your score and a fairly longer one paragraph, I was thinking that would add up to about 6 pages or more. So I would say just a thoughtful interpretation of each, but I was thinking, pretty good chunk or half page for each assessment. So like 1 or 2 paragraphs, depending on how you structure that.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And that doesn't have to be equal across like all 11 in a conclusion. You know, some of the, like 1 or 2 of these might resonate with you more than others. And so, you know, definitely feel free to go a little bit longer on one of them if you'd like. So really that 6 pages is more like of a minimum. And some of it really is just giving me your score and what that means before you kind of interpret and analyze the score. Grace, I can't tell if you're excited to take these or like you're like, no.
I'm excited. I think it's gonna be good. I'm also freezing, so that's why.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
I think it looks really cool. I love this kind of stuff. I know I have so many friends that like hate it. They're like, I hate personality tests, and I'm like, I think they're fascinating.
Yeah.
So I'm excited.
All right. Other questions?
Also excited, actually.
Awesome.
I've had to take a whole bunch of these during my undergrad classes. So like the was it the I forgot which one it is, but I think it was the Myers-Briggs. I've had to take that one before, which is crazy because I came out INFJ and they're just like, yeah, no one gets that. Okay.
Yeah, INFJ and INTJ are relatively rare.
Yeah, and
it
would
it's
be
very
curious
weird
to take it again, especially since I've actually taken it pretty recently and I got the same answer. So I'm kind of curious if I would take it like an 8th time and still get the same answer.
I always find it interesting when it changes. I would have loved to include DISC and Enneagram, but both are so lengthy that I didn't want to add those 2 just because I think they would take longer, and it's really hard to get like the DISC free, like a good free version, and it's not like cheap, and I couldn't really like in good conscience be like, hey, university, like, can you pay like $200 a student to do DISC? So yeah, I did not include DISC or oh shoot, what's the other one? I just said it. Yeah, you all know what I mean.
Yeah,
a couple fun ones. Yeah, Enneagram, which there are some free Enneagram, but they're so in depth that I was like, yeah, I think it's too long to make this group do it. But if you'd like to, and Strengths Finder, are you talking about Strengths Finder or a different Strengths, Casey?
Yeah, I think that's what it's called, Clifton Strengths Finder. It's cool, but it's stupid expensive.
It is. Well, so we get the Strengths Finder book with the code in it, and I was like, maybe I can find an entire like set of 25 that still had a code in it and mail them all to you, but I was like only able to get like 5 that still had the code that was usable. So maybe next time I can find enough Strengths Finder. I think there is a free version that you might be able to find, but it's not as comprehensive. All right. Any other questions about this? And we're gonna move on to leadership development for the next 30 minutes.
I guess I have a quick question. Do you foresee like the balance of like taking 11 of these? Are we gonna find, like, I guess was your anticipation that we'll find differences, or is like, do you think it'll just be like kind of a reinforcement of the same, like, are they all different styles?
They're all different aspects of leadership, and all different takes on leadership. There are a couple that are similar. I think that if you can to space them out, that would be awesome. Like you take one each day or something like that instead of doing all 11. But then I know some people would be like, yeah, I want to take all 11 at the same time. So I think you will find some overlap, but because of the definitions and the explanation of what each of these mean, you probably will see more differences than similarities.
Cool. Sounds cool.
Yep.
Okay, and just to clarify, all of our, reflections go at the end of all of it, and not like, I thought this was really cool because I got something different last time. So like all the
Yeah.
way at the bottom.
So for each one, you'll do an analysis, like answering all of these questions, or adding additional kind of questions if you'd like. So you'll have, like, say, for example, skills, approach, or score, and giving us what that means, and then your interpretation or analysis and answering the questions, and then on to the next one. And then there's a conclusion after all of them, your general takeaways and what was either most exciting or surprising overall, kind of your general conclusion and takeaways from it all. Did that make sense in the way I was explaining?
So it's basically like step 1, do all the quizzes. Step 2, wow, that was so cool.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay,
And
cool.
then I've got it on page, yeah, the first page here, your headers for all 12 sections. So
Okay.
yeah, score and then interpretation, score, interpretation, score, interpretation.
So score, interpretation, and then after all of them, kind of like the reflective part at the end.
Yes, of all of them together. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So I'm sitting here like, how is that going to be 6 pages?
Yeah.
So I'm just writing all the answers.
Yep.
Like, okay, that makes more sense. Okay.
Yeah, and you don't have to, I want to make this clear too. You don't have to like give me your filled out inventories, just your score. So if you want to print all of them out, or you want to write it on just another like other piece of paper, whatever, whichever your best way of doing that, I'll leave that up to you. But you don't have to provide your entire inventory like filled out. Just tell me what your score was, and like I had here was the number for my technical score, and here was the one for my human score. You could even just steal this line with the numbers added in it, and then your interpretation and your analysis.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for asking that clarifying question. Other questions? And Daniel asked, is that self-assessment? So all of these are self-assessments. They're not organizational assessments, but each one should be filled out from like one context that you're thinking about. So if that is, because a couple of these do mention like your workplace or an organization where you're employed, and you can take it from that perspective. Like let's say, for example, if I were to do this from, let's say, one of my clients' perspective, and in working with one in particular client versus how would I answer this when it comes to being a business owner, would be very different. So when you think about how you're responding to each of these, do it in one context across all of them. So if I'm thinking about my employer or an organization where I'm a key volunteer, keep that consistent through all of them. That's what that one is. All right, other questions? Thank you for that one, Daniel. All of these are self-assessments. Awesome. Well, let's talk about leadership development. You've got a relatively short article hanging out in this week's Moodle that hopefully is coming through. Casey, were you seeing that on your end? You should see in week 9.
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. Okay, good. Sometimes Moodle is not my friend, y'all. Okay, so this is the article, fairly, well, in the grand scheme of how articles work, short, I think 18 pages. And so I wanted to look at the three different programs in particular between coaching, mentoring, and action learning, because I think and I'm curious to get your perspectives in how these overlap and also how they're different. In curious, either like physical show of hands or with the emojis or reactions, who has been mentored before or had a formal mentor or served as a mentor? We'll take both of those. So a couple of you.
I was almost a mentor.
I'm sorry.
I was almost a mentor.
Almost a mentor, just so close. I mean, you're almost a mentor.
It was the weekend that we got evacuated from Peace Corps. So I was
Oh,
supposed to go
gotcha.
to a mentor meeting.
Maybe later this year.
That's the plan.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because we can get both coaching and mentoring very confused when they're actually two different things. Has anybody received coaching, formal or informal coaching before, that is different, or have felt that that's different than mentoring? Usually you end up paying for coaching, and mentoring you typically don't. So let's look at some basic definitions here. So coaching, form of guidance designed to improve expression of an individual's qualities, resources, and competencies. Now, when you go to mentoring, we'll compare this to mentoring here. Described as a support relationship involving two individuals which knowledge, strengths, and experiences are passed on from a mentor to a mentee. So if you look at the difference there, and I mentioned coaching is something typically, unless it's like pro bono coaching, but coaching is typically something that is a paid service, whereas mentoring is volunteer, or let's say a formal process through an employer. So with mentoring, it is sharing of an experience. So I'll give you an example. So within the Grants Professional Association, or GPA here in the States, I serve as a mentor to other grant professionals. And one in particular, she's also a consultant. And so when she has questions about, well, here's what my client is doing, how would you respond to this? Or I'm not sure how to respond to it. And so I will give her just my perspective on either how I've handled it in the past, or how I might suggest to her. Again, it's how she wants to respond to her own client, but helping somebody work through how that would happen, and based on my experience also in the same profession. That is more mentoring. Whereas, say, coaching is not really giving an answer. It is guiding someone and asking questions. So from a coaching perspective, I would then ask different questions, and I would not provide my personal perspective to lead them to do the same thing I would do. It is assisting in a professional figuring out a response themselves, by guiding them, coaching them, identifying best practices, which, not to say that mentoring doesn't work through best practices, but it's still very different. You can look at problems and come at it from a very objective way of walking someone through a problem, as opposed to mentoring, like, here was what my experience was, and here's how I handled it, and here's what I would suggest. Whereas coaching doesn't provide suggestions, or doesn't imprint my opinion or my perspective, or sometimes not my experience, onto that person. It guides them to figuring out the answer themselves. So, and it's interesting because coaching unto itself is an entire career path slash profession. And this is why I say that it's, when you typically go through coaching, it is a paid service. You are paying for a coach to help you through an issue. And that can be a variety of things, right? That could be a career coach, that could be a performance coach, that could be a wellness coach. That their sole frame of focus for you is getting you healthier, which is not necessarily losing weight, but decreasing cholesterol, getting you more active. And they're doing that through their expertise on this one topic. It could be, in addition to career coaching, like image coaching, like how you present yourself, like physically, how you dress, how you carry yourself, which I know for some people is like, that shouldn't be important. And in some professions it is. So that's how like coaching unto itself is its own profession slash career path, is you're really taking focus on one particular kind of area of assisting individuals and really building a book of business of people that you're coaching. Whereas mentoring is providing support, feedback, helping them. So there's a little bit of overlap there if you think of like some aspects of coaching that find themselves in mentoring, but typically not the other way around. You won't see a lot of mentoring in a coach and coachee, recipient of coaching relationship.
Let me give, maybe I don't know if I'm understanding it right, but I was a teacher before I came to this profession. So I used to take some extra classes for the people who were slow learners. I used to teach them mathematics, and away from the regular classroom teachings, I used to also take them, not necessarily for money, but I used to, as an extra class, I used to take those slow learners to the extra, to teach them, to guide them, and to coach them with, as you said, I used to guide them through all those mathematics questions, and just provoking them to understanding the problems better in mathematics. So as I understand, that might be, whether I'm understanding right or not, but I thought that is some kind of coaching, an example of coaching according to my understanding. And mentoring, I'm also taking an internship course now during this course. I'm about to start an internship with one of the species conservation division in my own organization. So I wanted to actually do an internship course in white-bellied heron conservation. So I was, from the future generations, I was also given a mentor who's supposed to advise me on the internship course. And it's between two of us. And he will advise me, and I might want to maybe clarify some my understandings on the conservation, the projects that he has. So is that an example of a mentorship and the coaching that I said earlier? Am I understanding it right?
Yeah, so it sounds like it's especially from the mentoring one that you mentioned second, absolutely. And then from the first one, when you were a teacher and you were doing tutoring and helping students, I think that is a good combo between coaching and action learning, which we'll get to the third type of action learning combined. Because in the coaching, you're helping them build skills and assisting them, as opposed to sharing, which math is kind of, it's finite, it's black and white, like 2 + 2 = 4. So that one is a little different to say, well, here's my experience. There is no experience to to really say it. It is an actual thing that adds up, right? But yeah, I would consider those exactly good examples of the difference of the two. in your context, in your perspective, yes, and what you've experienced. I'll give another example too. So one of the clients that I work with down in Kentucky, within the organization itself, each person, with the exception of like senior leadership, each employee has a mentor within the organization. And it's interesting because typically most of them, their mentor is their supervisor. But when they take on a mentoring role, it's meant to not be like supervisory in action, but more so helping and guiding someone in doing their work in the context of the organization. And they're to go to their mentor for support, to answer any questions, to run things up the chain of leadership. But then also like mentors sign their timesheets. So I think there is to me a little bit of confusion as to who's in, like, when you, I think it limits like what you're willing to ask questions about when that person also like is doing your performance evaluations and signing your timesheets and approving of what you do. But nevertheless, that's how this organization has structured their staffing and provided a mentor. So it is meant to serve in more of that like experience piece. But then that organization also has a person that is external to the organization that comes in and coaches either individuals or teams of within the organization on their work, and leading them through, say, I mean, sometimes she's been involved with conflict and managing conflict within a team, but mostly like improving the performance of a team. And the difference of that being is that this coach is an external person. They do not work for the organization. They're contracted and are external. They're not working in the day-to-day of the organization. So then she comes in to ask questions from a very objective, not subjective point of view, to guide a team into moving past or growing and improving performance or reaching goals quicker by making suggestions, or to ask the right questions so that we start thinking through, well, how can we improve this, or how can we achieve this goal, or we have this that we have to achieve. Let's say we have to serve 250 people and we're really struggling, in getting our 250. She's asking questions of, is there something else you can try in terms of social media, or is there something else you can try in terms of email marketing, or person to person recruitment of individuals to participate, for example. So in that one, it gives a good example of, the coaching piece is someone who's external to the organization, and mentors are internal to the organization. So just a different way of looking at coaching versus mentoring from that one example. Anybody else have an example they want to share of how they've experienced one or the other, or say both, either in a current organization or previously? Anybody have an experience they want to share? What I'll also mention too is that for both of these, you typically have an end date in mind. So for coaching services that you might pay for, it might be kind of like a subscription, if you will, maybe 3 months, 6 months to get through a specific problem. So that's finite, right? You eventually find an answer to the problem. You get a solution to the problem. Whereas mentoring, may typically go longer, but should have kind of a finite end in sight, at least. Sometimes it may take longer, but there is usually like a suggested time limit. So like for my GPA example, that one is that relationship, if you will, is supposed to last about 12 months. Well, my current mentee, I think I've been her mentor for going on like maybe a year and a half now, but we also had COVID. So, really the whole purpose of her having a mentor is to get her to a place where she builds her consulting practice to a point where it is sustaining her in terms of the amount of money that she earns and what she needs, and getting her through like a rebranding, redoing her website, getting her services structured, and then getting the clients that she wants to work with. So identifying, you know, who she doesn't want to work with, and in her case, firing 2 current clients that she has that are just not a good fit for her any longer. They're not serving her, and you know, you never want to have a client that you begrudgingly go in and do work for, right? So, you know, we're trying to find her clients that are more suited for what she's able to provide and their needs. So that's kind of what we're trying to achieve in that mentoring relationship. And it may take 2 years to get to that part where she's achieving. Whereas the other example that I gave you, where there's an external coach and your mentors within this one organization in Kentucky, that mentoring part is for the life that you have that job, right? Until you move on to another organization, you have a mentor there indefinitely until you're not there or they're not there, right? So that's something to think about if you're looking at having a mentoring relationship or hiring a coach or putting in these structures in your organization. How long are they supposed to last? You know, what's the ultimate goal? So like the external coach, she worked with the communications team for like a month to look specifically at how the team operates together. And then she, you know, jumps out of the situation and the team is left to make their own decisions. So clear as mud, right? It's there can be a lot of subjectivity in understanding the difference between the two. And then finally, what I want to bring up quickly is action learning. So this whole article goes into 3 different types of leadership development, specifically through the lenses of coaching, mentoring, and action learning. And so action learning has been in development for quite some time, but is a process of reflection and learning aimed at resolving practical problems and achieving best results, rooted in the observation according to which human beings learn and develop better. So I like to kind of equate this to experiential learning or internships, right? So you go in and you have, or even if you want to look at it as like a part of AmeriCorps and Peace Corps to a degree, you are going into a situation and you are learning as you are doing. You are looking at a problem and trying to solve it. So think of like internships as a really good example of kind of action learning or experiential learning. And as you can tell, this is a little different than coaching or mentoring, because there's a lot that's placed on, say, you as the person, you as the professional that's participating in action learning, as opposed to having more so like people guiding you, helping you through the process, or with coaching, asking questions, leading you to finding your own solutions. So it is different in that the teaching part of this is like formal education. So I think, Dorji, with your example, there was kind of a combo of active learning on the part of students and coaching on the part of you in working with them. And so you're actually doing formal teaching, as well as, you know, the tutoring part of more of a coaching aspect of getting them to a result, you know, of like, I'm not going to give you the answer to 2 + 2. You're going to find the answer yourself. I know that's very elementary, but, you know, just as an example. So I find that this is more helpful in certainly an education environment, but in something like an internship when you're getting educational credit out of it, that being the difference between coaching and mentoring. So action learning can be a formal program within an organization. So if you don't want to have like a formal mentoring program, maybe you implement something that is more action learning, experiential learning as you're doing, giving you what is best practice in this case. You could do it that way, and using that to solve a problem to reach what you're trying to do. So I hope that the differences between those three are clear enough to where you start to see differences. So over the next, well, I guess by the time we get to Monday, since we're on a Monday through Sunday week, you have a chance to read through this article and understand the three different types even more than kind of this initial introduction today. And thank you for providing examples. Any other examples that people want to share, or questions or perspectives? Maybe there's one of these three that you like more than another. So we have about like 3 minutes left to reflect on those three. Like this hour always flies by with you all. And I'll stop sharing. We can see each other's faces.
So I actually think action learning is quite interesting. At first, when I was reading it, it kind of reminded me of like a group growth session where you just come together and just, because it mentions you talk about like, you have to like share advice and frank criticism. And I'm like, oh my God. But it's so really cool though. It's like a form of like leadership development through like group, I guess like group connectivity, which like you have the group work together to like solve issues with like personal reflections and kind of like develop the group together.
Mm.
It's also weird that it was like popularized in the 1980s. Like that's, so it's kind of like a new thing. Like someone like create, like how can we streamline this process, and like just like kind of created it. So I thought that was quite interesting as well.
Well, it's funny you mentioned like an explosion of working with, or what is new. The whole field of coaching, what's really interesting is when we went through, at least in the United States, but this is kind of on a global perspective too. When we hit 2008 economic crash, a lot of people were losing jobs, at least in the US, but I know that had very much a ripple effect. The whole world of coaching between 2008 and say like 2012-ish blew up, because you had people with decades of experience that were essentially either forced retirement early or lost their job in their, say, in their, mid to late 40s, early 50s, have all of this experience and are finding themselves without employment. And the world of coaching exploded. It's not that it wasn't there before, but in terms of, and I'm talking different than say athletic coaching, right? The whole world of professional coaching just took off. And so that's been amazing just to watch how coaching has been professionalized over the past decade or so. In its transformation. It's if you go and kind of look at the progression of the profession, it's very interesting to see how it has changed in the past like decade. So I'll leave you all with that. So check out the article, read through it. Certainly if you want to make any comments in the forum, or if you have any questions that you would just like to share with me, I'm happy to answer. But I leave you good people with your week and the article, and taking a look at lab number 2 and getting that started. But you got like 6 weeks. So I hope you all have a good Tuesday.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, yeah.
Good to see
Good
you
night.
all.
Bye, guys.
Yeah.
Hi, Amir. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Dr. Harney,
Uh-huh.
This is unrelated to what we were talking about, but I'm wondering if you might have the answer because you're a grantee type person. Do you know if FGU has applied for the HERF2 funds, the higher education relief funds?
So actually, we've discussed it many times, and in many ways, like we think that we're not eligible.
Oh,
Yeah. So I've gone through it with Kelly a couple times, and I don't think Future Generations intends on applying.
okay. Thank you for the
Yep.
update.
Now, since I'm not like full-time staff, I'm just adjunct faculty. You might ask Kelly, like check in and ask if they have applied or if they're thinking about applying. But the last conversation that she and I had, they were not.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. See ya.